why we need to feel angry. My father died over 3 decades ago. He was travelling home on the tube in London, the Underground, the subway, having visited my mother, who was in hospital with an ear infection. My 2 sisters and I didn't live in London, and we tried to contact my father that evening to see how things were going. We couldn't get through. This was not like him. We tried and tried. Eventually, one of my sisters reported him missing to the police. 24 hours later, the police informed us that he had died on the tube as he had been leaving my mother from a heart attack. They hadn't told us. And this is despite the fact that he had much identification on him. In amongst my grief, I was angry. The next day, I went to the morgue at St. Mary's, and as I was entering, I saw a young policeman who had located us and my father's body and had been involved in communicating what had been going on. I was extremely angry when I saw him, and I let rip. I talked to him, well, talked may be an understatement. I spoke with him about British racism, about the racism of British police, and how could they not appreciate that an old Indian man still had a family and had dignity, something that they had ignored. As I stopped, I looked up, and he had tears in his eyes and was apologizing profusely. As he apologized, I felt that I was starting to forgive him. And why this is important is that it wasn't his tears and his apology that allowed me to be open to forgiveness. It was the fact that I had been angry and my anger had been heard, that I could then move on, let go, and forgive even the British police. Another example. Last week I went to see the film Hidden Figures. It's a 2017 film which is based on the stories of 3 African-American women, a scientist, an engineer, and a mathematician, who all work at NASA. The common goal for the whole project is to put someone in space, and in this case it ended up being John Glenn, and then working out the orbits so that he could come back to Earth safely. It's a very good film, no doubt about it, and if you haven't seen it, please do. But I mention it here because in one scene, one of the characters, Catherine Jones, played by Taraji P. Henson, gets angry. She works in the Space Task Group, and she gets angry with her group and tells her boss about her anger. She is the only black woman in the group. She is one of only 2 women. She's a key mathematician. She's a mild-mannered woman who has strong beliefs and values and doesn't enjoy living in Virginia, in segregated Virginia, despite the 1954 Supreme Court ruling. In this scene, she describes angrily to her boss how she has to walk 10 minutes each way to get to the bathroom. She points to a small coffee percolator that she is expected to use because it is marked coloured. The others don't want her to use the coffee urn that they drink their coffee from. And she finally tells her boss that her supervisor had said to her, "You can have only 1 string of pearls for jewelry." She looks her boss in the eye and says, "I don't have money for that 1 string of pearls." As you can imagine, this scene formed a pivotal moment in the film and led to actions on the part of her boss, herself, and others to desegregate NASA. And as it became desegregated, of course, they could work much more constructively on this common goal. I mention the scene, as you may have guessed, because her anger and being heard meant that she could then start to forgive her colleagues for their narrow-minded racism. And once she could start to forgive them, they could work together in collaboration. It was her anger that facilitated the forgiveness. Now, many people suggest that anger and forgiveness are polar opposites. Forgiveness makes us whole, anger tears us apart. However, I think there's something different going on. I think that anger and forgiveness are related to each other in a much more complicated way. Forgiveness needs anger. In order to be able to forgive, I need to feel anger. I need to express that anger so that I may let go of that anger and move into forgiveness. Now, I'm not talking about physical or violent anger. I'll say that for my next TEDx talk. The philosopher David Whyte said, stripped of physical imprisonment and violent reaction, anger is the purest form of care. Stripped of physical imprisonment and violent reaction, anger is the purest form of care. That is the anger I speak about today, stripped of that physical imprisonment and violent reaction. We become angry because we care about people, think parents and children. Or we become angry when we think about issues. Imagine what happens when you encounter blatant racism. When you see it, either you experience it, you see it, whatever. What do you feel? How do you deal with it? Many of us would feel angry. And yet, I want to suggest that anger is not the barrier to forgiveness, nor is it the opposite of forgiveness. Returning to my example from Hidden Figures, Catherine Jones' anger, the anger of the character, was a catalyst. It was a form of verbal action through which she spoke in order to right the wrongs done to her and other black people, in this instance at NASA. In fact, it would have been unforgivable if she had not acted as she did. Perhaps it is unforgivable not to act. Audre Lorde has said that anger is not the same as hatred. And again, I want to be clear that anger is not the same as hatred. Anger, she says, can be a liberating act of clarification. That is, anger can be a source of empowerment. But more than empowerment, I want to suggest that anger is a necessary and first step to be able to let go of perceived wrongs. Thus, anger becomes a crucial step in learning how to forgive and allows us to move forward to a forgiveness that is sincere. Last year, when I was filming Tibetan monks in North India for my next project, we talked about forgiveness. Of course, many of us know that forgiveness is fundamental, is the cornerstone of Buddhism. They also told me that not forgiving leads to more suffering because not forgiving can breed hate. And that can lead to more suffering on the part of the individual. And of course, forgiveness is the way to enlightenment, is the way to an inner peace so that we may also work on outer peace. I agree with all that the monks said to me, and yet I argued with them. Because I think we need to talk with each other about how we arrive at a true forgiveness. I can't simply say, I forgive you. How do I feel it in myself? We have to feel it openly and deeply. I was an international observer in the first one-person, one-vote elections in South Africa that undermined apartheid. There were long queues of people, long lines of people waiting to vote in the hot basking sun, and our job was to make sure that they could vote in a free and fair way. Following that election, the government set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This is a commission that's set up so that victims were asked to speak to their perpetrators and forgive them. That was the crucial bit. Victims of torture, victims who had had their children murdered, think Hector Peterson, were asked to come forward and forgive their perpetrators. Nothing was said, however, about the victims being allowed to be angry, about the victims expressing their anger, and the perpetrators hearing that anger before forgiveness was on the cards. I do know that forgiveness is the only way to eliminate hatred, no question. At the same time, the road to forgiveness we get on the road to forgiveness when we can locate our anger. That allows us to forgive, and then we suffer no hatred towards others. So in fact, we acquire an inner peace. We can be honest and respectful towards others. My final example is of Israel and Palestine. When Israelis settle in Palestinian villages and land, building their houses on areas that once belonged to Palestinians, few would think that the anger on the part of the Palestinians was unjustified. Also, getting to forgiveness while this is happening is also very difficult. It is almost impossible to forgive people who are stealing your land and your homes while they are in the process of doing it. However, once, and this is what we all look forward to, heartfelt peace talks begin and are completed to the satisfaction of many of the actors in this sad and far too long conflict, and the Palestinians have been treated fairly with land, resources, schools, they're getting back their homes in East Jerusalem, I think that is when I would have the courage to talk with them and say, was there room for forgiveness? Was there room to forgive the brutal repression of the Israeli state? Just as people in South Africa were asked to forgive the perpetrators, even though they had suffered at the hands of white apartheid, just as they were asked to create amnesty and forgiveness, maybe that's something that could happen when peace talks are successful in Israel and Palestine. In a period when close to 3 million people protested the election of Donald Trump, what will we do when he demolishes the Affordable Care Act? What will we do when he builds a wall between the US and Mexico? What will we do about the refugees and people from countries that he decides are sources of terror and not let them in? Many of us don't agree with his proposals. And the inspiring and angry protests that took place last week, led by women all around the world, demonstrated that. It is unforgivable not to act. The protest showed how angry we are because we care about our societies, we care about our people, we care about our planet. It is unforgivable not to act. And perhaps it is unforgivable not to feel angry. Anger is the purest form of care. That is why we need to feel angry.